Okay, so Donna and Fergus, you're two of our English teachers and both with a lot of marking experience and looking at marked work. Donna, I know you are also doing a lot of marking of student work at the moment. I also am aware that there are a lot of students that are trying to move into the essay writing stage without actually laying any foundations and doing some planning first. What would be your advice, Donna, to students that are not sure about or questioning whether or not doing a plan is actually worth it?
Well, I think a good way to look at it, writing an essay, is to compare it to something like building a house. So if you want to build a house, you need a blueprint first, and you need some good planning around it. And so when you're doing the planning process, what that enables you to see and to think about is what you want the big picture to be like. So is my house going to be functional? Is it going to look the way I want it to look? Is it going to serve the needs of the people that are going to be living in that house? They're all the questions that you'd be asking yourself when you're designing a house. And you'd have to be pretty silly to go about the building process before you'd done that planning. And I think essay writing is very similar to that. So you don't want to start writing an essay until you've done the thinking around, well, what is it that the question is asking of me? What is it that I really need to argue? And what is it that I need to make sure the marker knows that I know by the time that I've finished this essay? And so all of that thinking has to be organised thinking and planned thinking. And that's where our EBT, which is our acronym for Essay Building Template here at CoWorks, that's where it has to be the first step, because it's where a student does all of the organisation around their thinking. They can break down the question right down to the composer's purpose for creating their text and the context of what was going on at the time that it was created. So they have that foundational understanding of what was the composer trying to say and what do I understand from this text, and then, well, what is it that I want to say about it? And then you can, once you've figured that out, you can draw out, well, what evidence do I need? What quotes do I need? What ideas? And formulate a thesis and then a logically sequenced argument that is going to allow me to say what I need to say. And students can be often tempted to skip that planning step, like, oh, I don't really need to plan, I'll just go straight to the essay. And they can do that, they can craft an essay, but it's very obvious from a marker's perspective when you're looking at an essay where a student has skipped the blueprint and gone straight to I'll just write the essay, because it's quite often incoherent, it's disorganised. The evidence that they've chosen doesn't really match the points that they're trying to say. So they're not really achieving the purpose that they want to achieve because they've tried to shortcut by skipping that crucial planning stage. I don't know if you'd agree with that, Fergus, in your experience.
Yeah, I would. I was just thinking, having been at Bunnings a fair bit over the last few months, I was just thinking, imagine you build a house and then you just go and build a whole lot of you have a whole lot of building materials arrive on the site, and then you go to a bloke and say, well, okay, build it. And what's he going to say? Where's the bloody plan? Oh, hang on, I just thought you stuck it together. And as you said before, that's what an essay is like. And having spent a lot of time like you in the teaching space, it's really interesting when you watch kids write essays and they haven't written a plan. They'll sit there and they'll write the first sentence and then they'll scrub it out and they'll write it. And they spend an hour or so and they've got about 3 or 4 lines out because they really haven't got a process in place to get there. Everything needs a process. And it doesn't matter what, you can think of any aspect of life, you need a process. And why? So a lot of kids think that, well, for essay writing, you don't need a process. Well, sorry, guys. If you want to get something out that, fulfills what Donna's talking about, coherency, using the right evidence and so on, you have to have a plan. I mean, it's pretty much a no-brainer, isn't it?
Mm. And I think exactly, and the irony of it is that really by skipping that planning, that EBT step, students are thinking that they're going to save time by going straight to the essay. It's like, I'll save that time, and also, it's probably in a student's mind perhaps easier and faster and if I ask a student, do you want to do something that's going to require you to do a lot of thinking? Or if you could skip that and go to a next step, it can be tempting for a student to go, oh, the thinking part, that's too hard. I'll just go straight to the essay, save the time. But essentially, by going straight to the essay, what's going to happen is they're going to get feedback from a marker, which is going to tell them a whole lot of things that they're going to need to revise and fix in their writing, which is going to involve more steps in the drafting process, redrafting. And so that time that they think they're going to save by skipping that step, actually there are no shortcuts. You're going
to they've lost lots of time, haven't they? In that process, rather than winning time. And of course, HSC is a lot about time management because you've got other subjects as some. Do you want to spend 20 hours knocking out an essay, or do you want to spend 5 or 6 hours knocking out an essay? I mean, it's a no-brainer, isn't it? Because you've got to be very strategic in the time that you've got. And another thing, going back to that EBT you talk about, I think that if you're doing the thinking while you're actually working on it, it's really interesting that if you have to think about something, there's a much greater chance that that'll be hardwired to your brain so you can replicate it if you do the thinking. If you don't do the thinking, well, it'll go out the door before tomorrow, But if you actually are engaged in thinking, it's easy to recall that information. And I think there are lots of benefits. And it means when you come up to do, because if you, let's say, for example, you do an EBT on a text in term 4 of this year when you're starting year 12, you do all the thinking on it, but you can use that for an assessment, you can use it for the trials, and you can use it for an HSC. So it's a tool that you've got that you can keep using over and over again.
The strong EBT essay building template allows you to be adaptable and flexible to whatever the task or question is asking of you. But if I've got one essay that I've spent 20 hours putting together, because it's not coming from strong foundations and I haven't really put much thinking into the process and whether I'm hitting the outcomes, I'm really restricted to how I can apply that content over again. And trying to, and often those students, in my experience, the students that skip the planning stage of an essay writing process, they are also the students that want to memorize an essay. And if you're going into an exam room having tried to memorize an essay or maybe 3 essays, well, you're really setting yourself up for a chance that you're going to be exposed in that exam room, because if that question is in any way different to the essay that you have prepared, the question that you are responding to, well, suddenly you're going to be that kangaroo in the headlights, and I don't know what to do here. And a question for Donna and you, Fergus, how obvious is it when a student is not answering the question and they're just recalling a pre-written essay?
With the most recent revisions to the English syllabus from NESA, I think part of the revision and the changes that were made, particularly with Mod C, was because they recognised that students were doing things like memorising essays and coming into the exam room and just spewing out a rote-learned essay, regardless of what the question was, which goes right against, as a society, the direction that we're moving. We need people who are creative thinkers, who are innovators, who can look at concepts from new and unique perspectives. We certainly don't need people who can memorize content, because we have computers that can do that. That's where we need strengths in humanity, is by creating a generation of young people who can think on their feet and think dynamically. And from a marker's perspective, in response to your question, Jesse, I think it's very obvious where a student has come into is approaching a question, writing the essay that they want to write, as opposed to answering a question that is being asked of them. And it's as a marker, you're like, oh, it's so disappointing. You've got a young person here who obviously understands the text and and would have some really unique and interesting insights about it, but they haven't grasped the skill of how to look at a question, engage with it, build a thesis around it and construct a unique argument, because they just want to just write what it is that they've memorized in the hope that that's going to get them over the line. Would you agree, Fergus?
Yeah, I think so. That memorization is a real challenge, because if you write an essay, if you only write an essay, you've answered that particular question. And I could probably put a lot of money on the fact that that will not be the HSC question of your year that you're going to answer. The other important thing about an EBT is that it's a highly adaptable document. In actual fact, when you're not, the EBT will allow you to enter into all sorts of questions because it's a framework. You obviously have to adapt what you know to that question, and a question may require certain extra insights, but it's basically a framework for you to have a crack at any damn question you like. And it's very interesting. Kids would used to often say to me, "I'll bet your EBT can't answer that question." Well, then I'd sit down and say, "Well, have you looked at the question?" And this is how, and this would happen all the time. And another thing I'd like to add too is that, as I often say to kids, I'm an English teacher, and perhaps I'm a pretty boring person, but let me tell you what I'm really good at. I'm really good at reading. And that's the thing, when you're marking for an English teacher, your teacher is a highly experienced reader and has probably marked thousands of scripts. So they are really on the money about what constitutes good writing. And having sat in those big halls as we used to back in the day, marking the HSC, and I've marked writing tasks in the HSC, every now and again you'd come across a really interesting script. And let me tell you, you're sitting in that room day after day, knowing you had to drive 30 kilometres back home, and all of a sudden, here's a lovely piece of writing. It's like, whoa. And you hand it around to all the other markers amidst all the stuff that is so predictable, so boring, because that kid hasn't engaged and done the training about how to deal with successive different styles of questions and so on.
In a nutshell, and as you were saying, Fergus, you're a marker, you're in a marking centre. There's nothing more exciting than when a clear band 6 response comes across your desk and or across your screen as it is these days. And what are the things that are in that band 6 script that make you go, wow? Essentially, you've got a student who clearly has done all that pre-thinking, pre-planning, understands their text, and that can't come about unless you've had a student who has worked that EBT process over the course of their HSC, started it early, and then as they develop those insights and practice their writing, they've gone back to their EBT, they've refined it, and so they know their text in an interesting and unique way because they've engaged with it. And they've applied that knowledge from their EBT to a range of different questions. So they've practiced that skill. Not just, I'll take my EBT and I'll try this one practice question. They've mastered the skill of looking at lots of different questions and are there any gaps in my knowledge? Yeah. And so you get to the HSC and that student gets whatever unseen question they get, and then they can craft a response whereby they know their text and they're confident with it, so they have the luxury of the exam in the exam room of being able to focus on the question. What is this question really asking of me, as opposed to panicking, am I going to remember my quotes, or, am I going to remember this essay that I need to regurgitate? They can put that aside because they know that, and they can just look at the question. What are the key words? How can I respond to this in a really unique and interesting way to present my perspective of the text? And as a marker, it's so beautiful to have those moments where those wow moments where you can see this is a student who understands, who has perceptive knowledge about it, have their own unique insights, and can communicate that in those timed exam conditions because they've done the planning and the thinking throughout the process, rather than trying to skip that and go straight to the building stage.
That's right. They've done the hard yards before they enter into that exam space. They're ready. They've done it.
Yeah.